Chapter 4, for anybody who's still listening. 3 moon cycles passed in a numb routine of labour and sleep. Maudie was quickly set to work in the shipyards, while Arthur had the impossible task of keeping Beggins' hall clean, fetching supplies and cooking dinner. Moreover, Mrs. Beggins was still taking offence to Arthur's lack of the right arm, and made him wear his iron arm all the time. He loved his iron arm and how it would help him, but he wanted it to be his choice when he wore it. The shoulder strap rubbed if he wore it all the time, and it became uncomfortable day in, day out. But the worst thing of all, to Arthur, there wasn't a book in the house, not one. The only thing to read was the Longtown Chronicle, and he could only sneak that away at the end of the day when the Begginses were snoring. It felt as though they'd been thrown into a terrible dream. They didn't see a sovereign for their toils. Maudie must have earned back twice the amount the Beggins had paid Mistress Poacher. The siblings talked about running away, but even their rickety room was better than sleeping on the streets of the slums. Every day when Arthur had cooked dinner, he and Maudie would both serve it and stand at the edge of the shabby dining room, which Arthur called the Black Room on account of everything being black from floor to ceiling, even the table and 2 chairs. They stood watching the Begginses slobber and slurp the food down, waiting for the next command. "I heard they've relaunched that challenge to reach South Polaris," Mrs. Beggins said. Arthur's heart missed a beat. He glanced at Maud. "Why anyone would want to leave Longtown is beyond me," Mr. Beggins said, as he bit into a chicken leg, grease dripping down his hand. "Who'd want to leave all this comfort?" Arthur mumbled under his breath to Maudie. "Keep your mouth shut, and one of you fetch the loaf," Mr. Beggins said. Mrs. Beggins let out one of her silly high-pitched laughs. "I'll tell you why, Mr. Beggins. 1,000,000 sovereigns." "Not everyone does it for sovereigns," Maudie said, banging the loaf of bread on the table in front of Mrs. Beggins. "Watch what you're doing. That cost you, you know." Maudie turned and walked back to Arthur. "Sovereigns we earned," she muttered to him. Mr. Beggins threw down his chicken bone. "You cheeky blighter, I heard that. We give you a roof over your heads, the kindness of our loving hearts. You're lucky you went scrabbling about on the streets." "Now, Mr. Beggins, don't you go upsetting yourself over these ungrateful wretches." Mrs. Beggins pointed a pudgy finger at them. "There'll be no supper for either of you this evening." Arthur's stomach rumbled. Mrs. Beggins glared at him. "Now get out of my sight." Maudie's cheeks flushed angry red and took a step, but Arthur tugged her arm back. "Let's just go to our room. And there'll be no breakfast for you either," Mr. Beggins called after them. That evening Arthur turned and fidgeted in his bed and tried to ignore his complaining stomach. He stared through the gap in the roof at the stars, listening to the creak of the wooden beams. A cold draught licked over him, and the scratch of a small feet came from under the floorboards. He drew his legs up and felt the hairs on his body stand up. He hated rats, and Beggins Hall had dozens of them. Whenever he heard one, he imagined it crawling all over him, with its sharp little claws, long worm-like tail, and nibbling teeth. He flung off his covers and climbed out the window onto the rooftop. Silver-edged clouds drifted beyond the layered shapes of crooked roofs, bent chimneys, and washing lines. He balanced along the lip, then jumped the short distance to a ledge on the old ship watchtower next door. It was perhaps the one good thing about living at Beggins Hall. "Hey, wait for me," Maudie called, lurching out the window. "Shh! You'll wake them. They're snoring away like a pair of old wild boars." "I thought you were saying to sleep too." "What, with you jogging your legs around like Jumping Jack?" She laughed. "Honestly, Artie, mice and rats are pretty cute if you keep still enough to look at them. And let's face it, they're the only friends we've got." She joined him, and they pushed their way through the loose panel in the tower, then went up the rickety spiral staircase. After several flights, they climbed out onto the roof. Arthur balanced along the tiles and crouched at the end, taking in the view of Longtown. They could see everything from here. Around them were the slumps, so accurately named, with rooftops that curved and leaned precariously over the streets. Further north, the houses were neater. Elegant shapes filled the skyline. The tower of the Longtown Chronicles and a huge dome of the Geographical Society and Longtown University. Despite everything that had happened, Arthur still felt Maudie would study at the universities one day. She was destined to be the best engineer in Longtown. It was as though a shape which fitted her perfectly waited on the horizon. He thought he'd known his own destiny. Dad was going to take him up on his first expedition. One day they'd build their own ship. Maudie would design it, and the three of them would explore. Maudie as first engineer, Dad at the helm, and Arthur as Dad's first mate. Now that future had been snatched away, and there was just a dad-shaped hole in the world. To the east, the river snaked through Longtown, and fog clung to the distant hills, seeping into the city. The moon painted a blue evening hue on the arched buildings of North Uptown. Thin twists of smoke rose into the sky all around, and faint music floated towards them. "Is that a banjo?" Maudie asked. Arthur couldn't answer, his throat tight with sudden emotion. Dad used to play. Both of them stared in the direction of their old house, far off in the distance. Maudie took her mini uniscope from her tool belt and passed it silently to Arthur. Their mother had made it, and it was especially powerful, so they could see as far as their old neighbourhood. Way in the distance, a warm glow shone from Arthur's old bedroom, and the dark silhouette of a stranger could be seen. They had felt so free and so safe there, so happy. "I can't believe there's already someone living there." "Arthur, it won't always be like this. You never give up on anything. You and me against the world. Isn't that right?" He nodded. "Me and you." "Come on, retie my bow ribbon with me." Maudie paused. "Although, with the state of your hair lately, perhaps I could lend one to you." Maudie ruffled her hands in his rusty brown hair. They retied her ribbon. Then Maudie got up and balanced her way along the rooftop to the clock face, climbed up, and started examining the hand mechanism. Arthur remained where he was, watching a trade ship as it flew north across the sky, not far from them. The faint chug of its engines carried on the warm breeze. Arthur watched it fly across the moon, leaving wisps of grey behind it. After a minute he said, "We should get back." Maudie didn't answer, and he couldn't hear her tinkering any more. "I said we should get back." He turned around, and his heart stopped, because Maudie wasn't there. Scrabbling to his feet, he leapt to where she had been, and looked desperate over the edge, his head swirling with dread. "Maud!" he called. "What are you shouting about?" she said, swinging around from behind the clock face, then jumping to land on the roof tiles beside him. He thumped her arm. "I thought you'd fallen." "Ow! I'm likely to if you carry on like that. I was tweaking the mechanism around the back. It was out of rhythm." Arthur gave her sleeve a tug as his heart rate slowly climbed down. "Come on, let's see what scraps we can find in the larder." As he stood, he felt compelled to have one last look back at Brightstorm House. He paused. A tiny shape now circled above it. "Pass me your uniscope, Maud." After a moment he said, "It can't be." Maudie snatched the uniscope. "What is it?" "Oh." A pure white moon-bright hawk circled the roof of Brightstorm House, its outstretched wings giving it a soft W shape. Maudie lowered the uniscope and looked at Arthur, eyes wide. "Perithna." they both said. Without needing to say another word, they scrambled down the tower stairwell and into the streets, running towards Uptown, hunger burning their bellies and their muscles on fire, but not stopping until they reached Brightstorm House. Wheezing, they stood before the road home in the moonlit square. "What if Peritha won't come to us?" Arthur said. "She's only ever landed on Dad's arm." "Try," Maudie said. Arthur whistled a single note, like Dad used to. He left his iron arm back at Beggin's Hall, so he extended his left arm. Peritha flew down from the rooftop, her flight path uncharacteristically shaky. She landed unsteadily on Arthur's arm, her talons digging in. "It's all right," he said, as Maudie stroked her. Peritha's grip softened, and she dipped her head sadly. She was a large bird, and filled the length of his lower arm, but she was so much thinner than they had last seen her many moon cycles ago. "She survived. She somehow made it back," Arthur said. Seeing her felt like having a piece of Dad back. The bird had been inseparable from him, loyal for life, as all sapients were. They were rare in the wild, so it was usually only explorers who came across them, or could afford the few being paraded in Lontine's markets in the hope of a wealthy match. "What happened, Peritha?" Arthur knew she could only make sense of what he was saying. A sapient's heightened intelligence meant they could understand a person, but they couldn't communicate their own thoughts back easily. Peritha screeched. "It's all right, you're home." "What's that in her claw?" Maudie said. They both stared at her. An oval-shaped silver locket was looped by its chain around one of Peritha's talons. Elaborately inscribed on the locket were the entwined initials V and E, Violetta and Ernest. "It's Dad's locket," Arthur said. "But how?" Maudie gently opened it. There was the picture of their father smiling widely, slightly younger, his beard less full, his brow wrinkle-free. Beside him was a young woman with a hand placed lightly on Dad's chest, twinkling eyes and eyebrows set in a determined slant. The resemblance to Maud was uncanny. "Mum and Dad look perfect together," Maudie said. Peritha hopped onto Arthur's shoulder. His mind turned over and over as he raised his arm to stroke her head. "What are you thinking, Artie?" "It doesn't fit. If Dad was being attacked by a great beast, how would he have had time to take the locket off, give it to Peritha, and send her on her way? That would hardly have been his priority, right?" Maud nodded, and Peritha would have been fighting with Dad until the end. They both lost themselves in thought, standing alone in the dark street. After a short while, Arthur said, "Maybe the locket means something more, and maybe they're wrong about what happened." Peritha shrieked. Arthur and Maud's eyes locked. A spark of hope had lit inside Arthur. "I know it's a slim chance, but what if somehow he survived?" Maud shook her head. Peritha wouldn't have left him. Arthur took a few paces. "We have to find out. Artie, we can hardly traverse 3 continents without a skyship." "There's always a way, Maud. We could go to the Geographical Society and show them the locket." She paused for a moment, then looked at him doubtfully. "They need some convincing. It means something. They don't exactly think much of Brightstorm now. The Brightstorm name at the moment. They'll probably say we're making it up." "Then what about the Polaris Challenge? You heard Beggins say they had launched another. We could go ourselves to find the truth." Maudie laughed. "Now you're just being daft, Artie. We have no money, no ship, and that means no chance of going. Much as you can find a way around most things, I think you're dreaming." "Remember what Dad said. Don't call it a dream, call it a plan. There's always a way, Maud." There has to be. She sighed. We should get back. Arthur kicked his foot in the dust of the street. Maudie put a hand on his arm. Come on, let's think about it later. Right now, we'd better find a way of hiding Perithna, or Mrs. Beggins will be selling her at Thimble Street Market on Saturday, or worse, have us cooking her for dinner. They started making their way back to the slums. A thin figure around the corner had been watching them. They didn't notice him slipping into the shadows as they bouted past on their way back to Beggins Hall. Ooh, who is it?